It was a warm July night in 1881, Fort Sumner, New Mexico. The air hung heavy, thick with silence, and the kind of tension that feels alive. A young man moved barefoot through the dark courtyard, his shadow stretching long across the dusty floor. He was only 21, but by then, the world already called him Billy the Kid. Inside one of the old adobe houses, Sheriff Pat Garrett waited. He sat in a chair beside the bed of Pete Maxwell, Billy's friend, his revolver resting cold in his palm. Garrett's heart pounded. He knew the sound of those footsteps outside. He'd chased that rhythm for months. Billy stepped through the door and whispered in Spanish, "Who is it? Who's there?" And then it happened. A flash, a gunshot that cracked through the night like thunder. The kid fell, his body hitting the floor before his mind could even register the sound. The silence that followed was the kind that stays with you, the kind that changes people. Pat Garrett had done what no lawman in the West could do. He had killed the legend, or at least, that's what history says. When morning came, they laid Billy's body on a table and covered his face with a sheet. But those who saw it, they whispered. They said the face didn't look like him. They said Garrett had been his friend. Maybe he'd helped him disappear. And by noon that day, rumors were already spreading through the saloons and dusty streets. Billy the Kid ain't dead. That's how myths are born. Not with facts, but with doubt. And this one would outlive them all. Because to understand Billy the Kid, you can't start with the night he died. You have to go back. Back before the gunfights, before the wanted posters, before the legend. To a scared, hungry boy named Henry McCarty, who learned that in the Wild West, a man's worth was measured by how fast he could draw. Before Billy the Kid became a legend whispered about in every dusty saloon of the West, he was just a boy named Henry McCarty, small, quiet, and hungry. He was born sometime around 1859, maybe in New York City, though no one's ever sure. Back then, the world didn't care much about boys like Henry. There were no birth records, no photographs, just whispers of a mother and two sons chasing hope out west. When Henry was still young, his father vanished from his life like smoke in the wind. His mother, Catherine, moved them from city to city. First Indiana, then Kansas, finally Santa Fe, New Mexico. She was sick by then, coughing blood into her handkerchief. Yet she never stopped smiling for her son. In the New Mexico territory, the air was dry, the people were rough, and life offered little mercy. But Catherine believed she could build something new there. She never did. In 1874, when Henry was barely 14, she died of tuberculosis, leaving him alone in a world that didn't forgive weakness. For a while, he tried to be good. He worked at a hotel, cleaned stables, fetched water for strangers who didn't know his name. But hunger has a way of changing a man. And desperation, it's the beginning of every outlaw's story. One day, Henry was caught stealing food. A loaf of bread, they say. Maybe some clothes. The sheriff threw him in jail. A dim little cell with no air and no kindness. But Henry wasn't the kind to sit still. He slipped up the chimney and escaped into the night, barefoot, free, and reborn. From that day forward, Henry McCarty was gone. He'd call himself William Bonney now, and soon the papers would give him another name, Billy the Kid. He was lean, pale, barely 5'8", with a crooked grin that could melt ice or start a gunfight. And despite his boyish looks, he had a coldness about him, the kind that only comes from being betrayed too many times too young. They say he loved to sing in Spanish, flirt with the girls in the cantinas, and gamble his last coins away. But when he drew his gun, it was poetry. Smooth, fast, terrifying. He wasn't fighting for money. He was fighting for control over a world that had taken everything from him. By 1877, he'd already killed his first man. Some say it was in self-defense. Others say he did it because he could. Whatever the truth, that bullet sealed his fate. The boy who once stole bread to survive had just stepped into a life he could never escape. From then on, Henry McCarty was gone forever. Only Billy the Kid remained. By the time 1877 faded into 1878, New Mexico was less a territory and more a powder keg. Cattle barons ruled the land, merchants bought the sheriffs, and every man with a badge was owned by someone richer. For a young drifter like Billy, it was a world that made no sense. and it was about to explode. He drifted into a little town called Lincoln, a place that looked peaceful from the outside, but was ready to tear itself apart. Two powerful factions were at war. The Murphy-Dolan gang, who owned the stores, the cattle, and the law itself, and a new rival, a pair of Irish businessmen named John Tunstall and Alexander McSween, who were trying to bring honest trade to Lincoln County. Billy didn't care about politics. He just wanted a job and a chance to belong. Tunstall saw something in the boy, a quiet loyalty, a spark of decency still alive beneath the dust and scars. He hired Billy to ride for him, to work his ranch, and for a short time, Billy had something close to family again. Tunstall treated him with respect, gave him clean clothes, paid him fair, and in return, Billy would have ridden through hell for him. But in February 1878, hell came for Tunstall first. On a cold morning, while driving cattle, Tunstall was ambushed by Murphy's men, a posse led by Sheriff Brady himself. They shot him down, unarmed, and left his body in the dirt. When Billy heard the news, he didn't say a word. He just looked at the horizon and whispered, "He was my only friend." That's the moment Billy the Kid was truly born, because the boy who had been running from hunger and pain his whole life stopped running and started shooting back. Tunstall's men formed a group called the Regulators, part vigilante, part militia, and all fury. Their mission, to bring Tunstall's killers to justice. Billy rode with them, his revolvers glinting in the sun, his face young but eyes already ancient. They tracked down every man involved in Tunstall's murder, one by one, and when they finally found Sheriff Brady, the man who'd signed Tunstall's death warrant, Billy stepped into the street, leveled his pistol, and fired. 2 shots rang out. Brady dropped dead. It wasn't law, it wasn't justice. It was revenge, cold and clean. But revenge always has a price. Now Billy wasn't just an outlaw, he was a hunted man. The territory put a price on his head, the newspapers printed his name, and suddenly the whole frontier was talking about the kid. The Lincoln County War spiraled into chaos. Ranches burned, bodies fell, and the dust never settled. In the middle of it all rode Billy, smiling like death itself, his pistols singing through the smoke. He wasn't fighting for money anymore. He was fighting for something far more dangerous. His own idea of justice. And deep down, maybe, a part of him loved it. The danger, the freedom, the legend growing behind his every step. By spring of 1878, Lincoln County had turned into something out of a nightmare. The law had broken down. The courts were a joke. The governor was miles away, pretending not to hear the gunfire echoing across the desert. And in the middle of it all stood Billy the Kid, young, furious, and already too far gone to turn back. The Regulators, Billy's brothers in arms, weren't saints. They were cowboys, drifters, and outlaws, but each of them had a reason to fight. They called it justice. Everyone else called it war. Their enemies, the Murphy-Dolan faction, controlled the sheriff's office, the deputies, even the telegraph lines. But the Regulators had something money couldn't buy: conviction. They knew what it was like to be hunted, cheated, and left behind. And that's why they fought like men who had nothing left to lose. The war reached its first bloody climax on April 4th, 1878, in a dusty canyon known as Blazer's Mill. The Regulators were ambushed by Buckshot Roberts, one of the toughest gunmen in New Mexico. Roberts had no horse in the fight. He wasn't part of either side. But he made one mistake. He was suspected of helping Tunstall's killers. And that was enough for Billy. The Regulators surrounded the mill. Gunfire split the air like thunder. When the smoke cleared, men on both sides lay bleeding in the dust. Roberts was mortally wounded, but not before he'd shot down several of Billy's closest friends. Billy stood over their bodies, silent, revolvers smoking. Each loss carved a little more humanity out of him until what remained was something harder, colder, unbreakable. But the worst was yet to come. That July, the Lincoln County War reached its final stand, the Battle of Lincoln. It was 5 days of pure chaos, gunfire from windows, burning buildings, bullets snapping through the streets. Inside one adobe house, Billy and the Regulators were trapped. Outside, hundreds of Murphy's men surrounded them. They cut off the water. set the building on fire, and waited for the smoke to do the killing. But Billy didn't die easy. With flames crawling up the walls, he made a daring break. Sprinting into open gunfire, revolvers blazing, bullets cutting through his hat and coat. Somehow he escaped. The others weren't so lucky. The regulators were shattered. Lincoln was in ruins. And Billy the Kid, now the most wanted man in New Mexico, vanished into the desert. He left behind a trail of ash, a legend whispered in every saloon and soldier's camp. The kid can't be killed. He's too fast, too lucky, too cursed, and in a way they were right. Billy was no longer just a man. He was a ghost with a gun, haunting every sheriff and bounty hunter who dared to chase him. By 1880, Billy the Kid had become both famous and hunted. The newspapers painted him as a devil with a baby face, a gunfighter who laughed while killing men twice his age. But those who knew him said he wasn't the monster they wrote about. He was smart, polite, and oddly charming. The kind of man who could make friends with a stranger he might have to shoot tomorrow. He drifted between hideouts. Fort Sumner, White Oaks, the dusty plains of the Pecos River. Everywhere he went, he left behind stories, dances, shootouts, and escapes that defied belief. The law chased him across the desert, but the kid always slipped through their fingers like smoke. Until the law got a new face. Enter Pat Garrett. Tall, lean, calm as a rattlesnake in the shade. He was a former buffalo hunter, a gambler, and once a friend to Billy. The two men had played cards together, shared whiskey, even laughed under the same New Mexico sky. But times had changed. By late 1880, Garrett was elected sheriff of Lincoln County, and his first mission was clear. Find Billy the Kid, dead or alive. It wasn't personal, it was duty, but duty has a way of turning men into ghosts long before they die. Garrett began his hunt in December. He rode hard, gathering a posse and tracking Billy through the freezing plains. On December 23, 1880, they surrounded a small cabin at Stinking Springs, one of Billy's hideouts. At dawn, the shooting started. Bullets ripped through the cold morning air. One of Billy's men fell, and the others surrendered. When the smoke cleared, Garrett walked inside, and there he saw him. Billy, calm as ever, his hat tipped low, a half smile on his lips. Garrett didn't gloat. Billy didn't beg. It was as if both men knew this was just the first act of something much larger. Billy said softly, "Well, Pat, you've got me now, but you'll never hold me long." And he was right. The trial came fast. In April 1881, a judge sentenced Billy the Kid to hang for the murder of Sheriff Brady. They said he didn't flinch. He just grinned and said, "You can go to hell, you sons of bitches." Then they chained him up and hauled him back to Lincoln to await execution. But you can't cage a legend. On April 28, 1881, the Kid made his most daring escape. Using nothing but his cunning and a stolen revolver, he killed two guards, Deputy James Bell and Bob Ollinger, and disappeared into the night. When townsfolk rushed to the courthouse, they found Bell's blood on the staircase and Ollinger's shotgun still warm. From the balcony above, Billy had called out one last mocking line. "Hello, Bob!" Boom! Ollinger never had time to look up. Then Billy mounted a horse, smiled into the night, and rode away free once more. Every man in New Mexico wanted him dead now. Every rancher, every lawman, every bounty hunter. But Billy the Kid didn't run to Mexico. He stayed close, in the only place he'd ever felt at home. Fort Sumner. And that's where his story would find its end. The summer of 1881 was suffocating in the New Mexico territory, a dry, breathless heat that clung to the skin and never let go. Fort Sumner was a quiet cluster of adobe buildings beside the Pecos River, where ghosts seemed to outnumber the living. And one of those ghosts, Billy the Kid, had returned home. He shouldn't have. He could have vanished into Mexico, changed his name again, and disappeared forever. But Fort Sumner was where his friends were, where the music still played, where he felt for once like more than an outlaw. He spent his last days laughing, flirting, playing guitar, and dancing beneath the stars with Paulita Maxwell, the sister of his friend Pete Maxwell. Some say she was the only woman he ever truly loved. Others say he stayed because he was tired, not of running, but of living in a world where every sunrise came with a bounty on his head. But fate doesn't let men like Billy grow old. Sheriff Pat Garrett had been tracking rumors that Billy was hiding near Fort Sumner. Late that evening, he rode in quietly with two deputies, John Poe and Thomas McKinney. They went straight to Pete Maxwell's house, a long adobe building lit only by the faint glow of an oil lamp. Inside, Garrett sat on the edge of Pete's bed waiting. The two deputies stood outside, tense, watching the shadows. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of dust and mesquite. Then more footsteps. Light, cautious. Billy had arrived. He'd come from the next house, barefoot, wearing only a shirt and trousers. He was looking for a slice of meat. Some say for a late-night snack, others for Paulita's family supper. He stepped through the darkened doorway and saw movement, a shadow sitting on the edge of the bed. Billy's hand went for his gun. "Ken S." No answer. He took a step closer, the light barely touching his face. "Ken S. Ken S." Garrett recognized the voice instantly. He raised his revolver. A flash. A single shot. Billy fell back, gasping once, then silence. Pat Garrett had just killed the most wanted man in the West, or so he thought. The next morning, people from all around came to see the body. They said he looked peaceful, like a boy finally getting rest after a long, hard ride. His friends wept, his enemies smiled, and the newspapers wasted no time printing their headlines. Billy the Kid, dead at 21. But not everyone believed it. Almost immediately, whispers began to spread. Some claimed Garrett shot the wrong man. Others swore Billy escaped and lived under new names. Brushy Bill Roberts, John Miller, maybe even a rancher down in Old Mexico. And Pat Garrett himself? He gained fame, but little peace. He'd go on to write Billy's story, but many said guilt haunted him till the day he died. Billy the Kid became larger than life, the outlaw who smiled at death, the boy who wouldn't be tamed, the ghost who refused to vanish. They say legends never die. Maybe they're right, because if you stand in the deserts of New Mexico tonight, when the wind is just right, you might still hear the soft echo of spurs, the faint laugh of a young man who lived fast and died free. Billy the Kid, the outlaw who refused to die. The year was 1881, and Billy the Kid was dead, or at least that's what the paper said. But death for Billy was never an ending, only the beginning of a legend. In the years that followed, his story spread faster than wildfire across the American frontier. Dime novelists, desperate for heroes and villains, seized his name and twisted his story. One book called him the Boy Bandit King. Another branded him the Monster of the Plains. But the truth, it was far more complicated. America was changing fast in the late 19th century. The frontier was closing, the railroads were conquering the wilderness, and the age of cowboys was dying. People needed something to hold on to, a last echo of rebellion, a reminder of when one man and his gun could still make history. And Billy became that symbol. To some, he was a murderer, a thief who killed without conscience. To others, he was a folk hero, a boy who fought corrupt sheriffs, greedy ranchers, and an unjust system that crushed the poor. He became the American contradiction, part villain, part saint, a reflection of everything wild, reckless, and untamed about the human spirit. Then came the sightings, stories of a man who looked just like Billy, older, quieter, living under new names. In the early 1900s, a man called Brushy Bill Roberts stepped forward in Texas, claiming he was Billy the Kid. He had scars in the right places, spoke fluent Spanish, and remembered details no one else could. He asked for a pardon, the same one Billy had once been promised by the governor but never received. But when Brushy Bill appeared before state officials, they laughed him out of the room. Weeks later, he collapsed on a street in Hyco, Texas, and died. Some say from a heart attack, others say from heartbreak. To this day, his grave reads, Brushy Bill Roberts, Billy the Kid? A question mark. Even in death, the legend refused to end with a period. When motion pictures arrived, Billy the Kid was reborn once more, this time in flickering black and white. From Howard Hughes's The Outlaw, 1943, to Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973, filmmakers turned him into the eternal rebel, the handsome gunfighter, wronged by fate, doomed by freedom. Bob Dylan wrote songs about him. James Dean once dreamed of playing him. And every decade since, someone new has claimed to know the real story. But maybe that's the point. Billy the Kid doesn't belong to history anymore. He belongs to myth. Over a century later, people still visit Fort Sumner, standing over the grave that may or may not be his. They leave coins, bandanas, letters, offerings to a ghost. Some say at dusk you can feel it, that restless spirit still riding the desert winds, grinning that crooked grin, forever young, forever wild. Billy the Kid was never just a boy with a gun. He was America's reflection in the mirror. The dreamer, the rebel, the outlaw who refused to bow to the world's rules. He died at 21, but he lived the kind of life most men only read about in legends. And maybe that's why he'll never die. Because Billy the Kid isn't buried in New Mexico. He's buried in every heart that's ever longed to be free. Like and subscribe for more.